Hello and welcome to Upside, where every week we look behind the headlines affecting European venture. Today, the premium best supremo VCs in Europe are with me. It is Andrew and Lomax and my good self. And we're talking about what's on the show this week. We've got a quick news roundup, seeing what's on people's minds. We've got Mistral raising 800 mil, but why? The UK defense tech brain drain, looking at that. Poolside loses CoreWeave, which is a slightly bigger topic than it sounds, potentially. NHS staff are boycotting Palantir, unpacking that one. Some predictions and deals of the week.
This show is not investment advice, and the hosts of this episode may be invested in the funds and companies featured.
Now, gents, how are you both? Andrew, how are you? We haven't seen you for a gazillion years. What's new?
Been busy, portfolio, raising the third fund, still happening. So yeah.
How you getting on with the raise? How's all that?
It's moving.
Good.
I'm not gonna put a date on it because that would be dumb.
Are you finding it? I was going to say easier. I know it's not. Are you finding it more fluid now? Is there?
I was going to say that's an oxymoron, but yeah, I think things are moving. The sector that we're in, given we're resilience, which is all related to defense, definitely helps. Obviously quite topical. Things can't ever stay stationary forever, but it's still a tough market, right? The private equity market still hasn't loosened up, but let's hope the big SpaceX IPO encourages others to get on the bandwagon.
I was saying to somebody yesterday, for the first time in my life, I'm sexy. Because Mads and I were doing whatever, ML, Industry 4.0, 10 years ago, like about as sexy as a phony dog poo. Now we're in the zeitgeist and everyone is talking about resilience, like with you, Andrew, and physical AI and manufacturing and onshoring, friendshoring, reshoring, all this stuff, all the spaces that we're in. And then I thought, oh, bugger, everybody's in now. It's like, we didn't do any of the other zeitgeisty nonsense, all the other hypey stuff, but now we're in it. So now I'm fearful that every other bugger's in it.
Well, you were a pop star once. I mean, you were definitely cool at one point, and then you took a hiatus, and now you're cool. Now you're cool again, Dan. So
I didn't do anything cool in pop stardom, but isn't this the normal route into ventures? That's what you both did.
I think, though, by the way, I think it's a very good point that you raise, is that if you build a brand, a network, a thesis, a portfolio around a certain vertical, and that vertical suddenly becomes in vogue, it can be both like good and bad for you, I think. Like good in the sense there's more capital for syndicates, for follow-on deals. Bad, of course, is there's much more competition.
Created more conversations. Do you know what?
Yeah.
We have had more LP conversations because they've always known what we've done. They've either liked us or not, and so what? But then because we've not jumped, I don't know, from blockchain to AI to defense, we've always done the same thing. It has loosened the elastic a bit, and it's created, I don't know if I've just got happy ears, but it has created more conversations, which I think is good. But then there's a lot more competition in the space, and also the Iran conflict and everything else is and fears of inflation is making people sit on their hands a bit more. So it's countering.
But I think there is also for people who allocate regularly to venture capital across a number of different funds, when a category matures to the point that it almost becomes a box that a venture capital allocator wants to allocate to. You could take deep tech, for example. If you go back to 2015, 2016, most fund of funds or institutionalized family offices or pension funds that allocated routinely to venture would rarely have an allocation to, say, deep tech, right? They might have an allocation to biotech, and then the rest would be what they would call ICT, probably, like or IT, or that's very old school, but that's how they would look at it. At some point I don't know when you guys think this, but from about 2019, 2020, 21. The fund of funds would actually have an allocation to, say, deep tech, for example.
There is inertia,
became a recognized category, which made it easier to sell to them because it was something that they actually wanted, probably came into conversations wanting to buy. The problem that you also have with all of this stuff is, though, that the people who have the distribution capability already, like the big funds, can spin up products in those areas.
Yes. And they have the brand cachet.
Yeah, they have the IR team, they have the trust, they have everything. And so when A16Z sets up a defense fund, a deep tech fund, a gaming fund, suddenly you, despite having done it for 10 years, you just get blown out of the water anyway. It becomes an irrelevant. So it's always the trick in venture is you can be very vertical specific, but even when your vertical kind of starts to form part of the zeitgeist, it doesn't actually necessarily fix anything for you, Yeah.
No, it's true. It's true. I'd rather be on that side of the fence than the old side of the fence where we were. So I have to see the positive in that upside.
Completely, 100%.
So 100%. I think it's better to have been early and then caught the zeitgeist. Okay, now I'm sexy again. Yay! I'm going to go for it.
Yeah, and also when when you talk to founders, and you've been allocating in that domain for the last 5-10 years, it's a world of difference for that conversation that you have with them versus a generalist GP who's starting to allocate.
And the network you have as well. We have instant corporate network into those spaces because we've been doing it a decade. So it's all. I'm going to take it as a positive, but you're absolutely right. It's a bit disconcerting to also
positive, but it's never as big a positive as you think it would be, right? You never. There's always more nuance to it.
True. I've written down some stuff that caught my eye. First being the Artemis mission, obviously heading back to the moon at 93 bill. Maybe there's something you want to talk about on there, Andrew. I think that Trump declaring victory and then not declaring victory. I don't know if you guys saw his.
Oh, let's stick to something. Let's start with something positive at least. I mean, going to the moon again. How cool is that? It's by any measure, it's cool. The rocket's the size of Big Ben. It's 250,000 miles.
This is the biggest rocket ever, right? This is bigger than Starship. Isn't this bigger than anything that's gone so far?
It might be tall. I don't think it will eventually be bigger than the largest Starship.
I think Starship will be bigger.
but it's pretty close. By any dimensions, it's fantastical, right? They'll be the fastest humans in the last 50 years because nobody else has been to the moon. I just think isn't it that incredible? It's half a century since humans have been to the moon, which is it's over half a century. So it's mind-boggling. But the most important thing is they won't have to drink their own pee, because it's only a short mission. It's 10 11 days.
I'm sure there were some filters in the way.
They'll just vent it to space. Unlike if you're on the International Space Station, you have to recycle. All goes round. But there are other parts that are recycled. The engines. I think the rocket engines have launched 22 shuttle missions before they launched this mission. So a bit of circular economy in there as well. I just think it's amazing, and I think I posted on LinkedIn.
Tech?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big mix of new and old tech, which is kind of cool as well. So I posted on LinkedIn yesterday that, if you have kids or even younger siblings, you just sit them down and make them watch it and explain it to them that thing is taking off and going to the moon and coming back.
But it wasn't that big a news story, was it?
I mean, it got covered. It did get covered live on most of the main news channels.
I watched it live at 11:25, 11:30 last night.
Oh, maybe I'm just head in sand.
I think when they land on the moon, which is the next mission, that will probably get much larger coverage. But it's cool either way.
And this is to build a base, right? This isn't just to go and come back. This is to scout out building a base, which I think is going to be interesting.
That's the medium-term plan.
Well, interestingly, I mean, actually, by the way, they're going to do in the middle. This is Artemis 2. Artemis 3, the next one, was going to be man on the moon, but actually it's going to be Artemis 4 now in 2028. Yeah. Things are slipping a little bit.
Well, they have to make sure that all the kit works, because there were some problems with the bits that were made by all the different manufacturers. And
by the way, many of which if you want to add a European element to this, is that the Europeans have been like quite major suppliers to the Artemis program.
That's right.
Which I guess is both good and bad, because it kind of represents our place in the world as just part of the supply chain, but it also means we are a critical part of it. So Europe did provide what's called the European Service Module, which powers Orion spacecraft. So propulsion electrical systems.
Unless Trump inflicts tariffs on it in between, and then
of course, yeah. But then I guess NASA, which is a government agency, will just have to pay more. So he's shooting himself in the foot. But the interesting thing, which actually does negatively potentially impact Europe, and it shows you what happens when you are just a supplier, is this week, maybe you saw that Lunar Gateway was effectively cancelled. The Lunar Gateway is a part of the Artemis program, which is to build an equivalent of the International Space Station, which currently orbits the Earth, to build that which orbits Moon. And the Europeans, including Thales and I think Airbus, had been like critical suppliers of that and actually sunk a lot of money into that project already. And then it was cancelled this week.
Why? Do we know why?
Postponed / cancelled in favor of actually building and focusing resource and attention on actually building a kind of physical lunar base on the Moon rather than having the satellite in orbit. It's not a reverse in the program. If anything, it's an embellishment or an enhancement. But the Europeans are actually pretty involved in the Lunar Gateway, and now maybe they're going to lose a bunch of business off the back of it and have had a bunch of wasted work for everything they've done.
That's a weird thing to do. Have a satellite around the Moon. What's the point in that?
Well, that was supposed to be the kind of key, like, launch beachhead or launch pad to go in for lunar missions, right?
The other things that caught my eye this week: Apple turned 50. Software stocks, so the S&P down 20% year to date. That's quite an interesting drop. SpaceX, how can we not talk about SpaceX and the Moon? Filed for potentially the largest IPO in history. It's 75B with a B at 1.75 trillion, which I think is just absolutely
valuation's gone up, no? Gone up from 1.5 trillion.
I'm trying to decipher what's kind of Muskian bluff and bravado, and actually what's reality. I think the latest number was 1.75, but I'm sure by the
stock market is mostly bluff and bravado, isn't it? Anyway, I mean, it's all sentiment driven, so horses for courses.
Somebody's got to accept that figure at some point. There's going to be dollar bills changing hands in the public markets. Intel, interestingly, look like they're turning the ship. The new CEO there, they struck a $14 billion deal to buy half. I don't know why half of what they sold to Apollo, the Irish chip plant. So I don't know what's going to happen there, if that's meaningful. Mistral raised $830 million in debt, which I also do think is meaningful, to build AI data centers across Europe. Poolside lost its CoreWeave compute deal, which we're going to dig into later. DeepSeek, I don't know if you guys saw this. DeepSeek had a 7-hour outage on Sunday. Did you see that? I'm not sure how meaningful this is. I mean, vendors are going to go down and have problems, but
AWS has it the whole time. Yeah,
but not 7 hours. That felt quite seismic. I wonder if people will then challenge this kind of service from those kinds of vendors. NHS staff are boycotting Palantir. No great surprise.
No surprise there, no.
Sentiment-wise, but I don't know if there's going to be any knock-ons there. StarCloud raised 170 million. We'll talk about that later. And
I'll pick you up on Palantir.
Go.
I'll pick you up on Palantir. I mean, I think this is going to be the tip of the iceberg going forward, and it's what happens when you don't have sovereign capability yourself. I mean, the things that the staff have been complaining about, my understanding is not only was it sort of impinged on them top down with very little consulting, it's the fact that it's an American company, an American defense company. It's the same story about all the guardrails and what happens to that data. Probably the largest data set of health data in one single place anywhere around the world, even though it's sort of distributed across the NHS, but one organization at least. And the fact that a British company is not doing something with that and isn't funded to do that, this is what happens if you get behind the curve on this technology. And this will continue now across every industry, across every sector, across every part of government, unless we decide to catch up and compete in the race and be an AI power in the same way that we're a nuclear power.
Well, do you think we can? I mean,
yeah, throw money at the problem. I mean, we were 4 years late with the hydrogen bomb. We still got there, right?
But just to give this some context, so Palantir won this contract in 2023, and I think the timing of that is very important. And it looks like it's a blank check up to around 450 million, which is a big chunk of change. And as you were talking about, Andrew, this kind of trust gap thing that has been exposed now. So the NHS staff making the news cycle is a big thing. So this is going to be a point of conversation for other public sector workers, I have no doubt. I'm trying to work out where the opportunity is, if there is anything for UK health tech founders, whether there is somebody that could potentially take the place of Palantir. Is there even looking beyond the UK, is there a European challenger that could fill this gap? So They were the questions. I don't know if either of you had any reflections on those questions.
If you think about hospitals in general, the big platform systems that have been put in place in the US is Epic and Cerner, and they've started to infiltrate the European market. I personally think there's a huge opportunity to build an Epic or Cerner for Europe and or the UK.
Are
And
there
that
any,
requires-
do you know, Lomax? Are there any?
Well,
Are there any kind of contenders on the
Well,
way?
I've backed one. It's a pre-seed.
There
but,
you go. Talk your book, baby. Come on.
Yeah. They're a great team out of Italy. So I do think there's a big opportunity there. It's going to require, savvy founders moving fast, but also moving fast and probably not breaking things in this sense. Selling into healthcare is actually moving fast and steadily and carefully, probably, because it's heavily regulated and there's a massive trust-based component. So the sales cycle from a startup perspective will be very, very long. So you need to have founders who build that around the company around that, and need to be very, very good at fundraising for sure, and taking people on the journey and building trust with it's a B2G sale at the end of the day. Often it's not always B2G because there's a lot of private providers in Europe too, but I think that's a huge opportunity.
How close are your Italian team to actually being a vendor?
They're already a vendor, but they're at the moment for specific point, with the early product, but the plan is of course to expand over time. But they're very, very early stage. I mean, this would be a journey where they need to raise.
I mean,
hundreds of
there are
millions.
companies that are building great businesses. I mean, Arcurex, who I advised very, very early on when they first started, pivoted from trying to solve the problem of antibiotics being prescribed, but they identified an issue of communications and administration problems between patients and the clinics. They started with GPs. I think they've got 98% coverage of GPs in the UK, 350,000 NHS users. I think like over 50 million patients being supported there, and they're actually expanding the other way to the US. So they've done extremely well. So it is possible to, and in their case, they went bottom up, which is a fantastic kind of viral approach, and they got funded by Tomico. So it is possible to build these businesses, but the founders out there with the ambition, it's the same old story. You've got to be able to raise the cash, especially when you're talking about these much larger platforms. Palantir has been around a long time, and especially when you're talking about going forwards AI. So that's the challenge. It's founders will go where they need to survive, and until we plug that capital gap, they'll go where the money is.
Today, if you want to build a $1 billion revenue health tech company in Europe, it's basically impossible in Europe. You have to go to the US. Like, as a reminder, health is 20% of US GDP. It's an insane number. So the proportion is much higher than any other country in Europe, and the absolute number is multiples of what we have in Europe. So if you want to build a generational health tech company, basically you have to go to the US. Okay.
Yes.
And we've seen that, Accurex going there now. There's a company called Anima Health, which started in the UK, which is now doing incredibly well in the US. There's tons of examples. Obviously Hinge Health came out of the UK, Sword Health came out of here in Portugal. And they're now, I think, 350, 400 million revenue companies. But taking this back. So I do think if Europe wants to benefit from sovereign systems for its hospitals, and obviously these are, because there's a lot of state sponsorship of these systems, unlike in the US, like these are a massive component of the increased amount that it costs to run a country in Europe.
I saw a few American, was it Matt Mettler from Sequoia? He was knocking this idea of sovereign tech, calling it welfare, which I thought was quite interesting.
Well, I mean, but even that, maybe the word sovereign is being thrown around a bit too much these days. But if you want to build homegrown companies that you feel proud of and actually deliver value for your economy, then you need to encourage them and give them the environment in which to flourish. Just maybe stepping back to this Palantir thing, there's a broader question for Palantir, I think, like, can they as a business have a go-to-market in both defense and in healthcare? To actually potentially quite contradictory things, because interestingly, this problem also happened in New York. So it's not just a sovereignty anti-American thing, within like the New York healthcare system, they are not going to renew Palantir contracts for a similar reason, right? So that's probably a little bit politicized, I'm sure, as well. But the point is that they have that question. There's also the question, which also could take place in any country, in any company, is, you know, to what extent does it matter, and should you listen to your employees as to either who you do business with or who your suppliers are? You know, remember this issue came up a lot.
Well, if they're the ones on the front line, if they're the ones using the system.
Well, and actually this came up if you remember, in a slightly different context, but this came up in 2018, 2019 in the US, when the big tech companies were winning contracts with the US defense, with the Pentagon, right? Do you remember the HoloLens contract that Microsoft had in 2019, the $480 million contract they had with the Pentagon, and all the Microsoft employees, a section of them, a cohort of them, complained about it. And I think Satya Nadella said to them, actually, guys, we're going to do this contract. You can be reallocated to another account if you want. The same thing happened at Google in 2018. And in that case, I think that Sundar actually listened to the employees and did not renew the contract with the Pentagon. So there is a kind of broader question as to how much you as a company have listened to your employees about who you sell to, or in this case, in the NHS, who you buy from. And I do think, as you say, Dan, like, they are people on the front line. You would be stupid not to take their opinions into account. They're the ones having to plug the sensitive data into this software and or use it. I do think part of this is just like, yeah, as I said, the kind of Palantir specific issue is like going to market into markets. I mean, you've got the bloody chairman of Palantir, Peter Thiel, I think, is quoted on record as saying that the NHS is actually better at making people sick than making them better, which is you've got the chairman of a company for a big client saying things like that, then, you know, that's I guess a very Palantir specific thing. But at the end of the day, we may well see these things happen more and more across Europe. And the answer goes back to what Andrew was saying, is if you have systems that have more trust, they're more likely to win contracts and do a good job, and that's better for everyone. Sometimes we worry about the octopus effect. You know, people talked about Goldman Sachs being the big octopus, and people talk about Palantir like taking over the world. You know, there is actually an ability, you know, that for this to be resisted, and for companies to build brands and go to markets around trust, which therein leaves an opportunity, right, for people
which
to
is
become,
the European opportunity, right?
Like
This is
my amazing Italian team to become the Epic of Europe, or whatever it may be, you know. And there's and Andrew's quoted some, you know,
regulation, compliance, and understanding the culture and market in Europe has to be part of this new European moat.
For sure. It's all part of like building a brand and a sales process and everything, especially in these markets.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
The
I'll
thing
take that
I
as a
was
positive.
thought was very interesting, which is slightly a side point, but it's like the Palantir platform was only scheduled to deliver 150 million in cost savings until 2030. But when you put that in the context of the whole NHS budget, it's like it's piffling. It's piffling.
Yeah.
I'm not suggesting that a European
that's
company,
one trust, one annual budget, right? Out of 240
I'm
or
not-
something they were looking to serve.
and not even I would have thought, but like I mean, I'm not suggesting that a European company would do any better, but I'm just like, the numbers are so big for these healthcare systems. Anyway,
And it's a big contract. Although that said, I mean, let's say it is half a bill at, you know, in 5 years or 4 years. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe that's not massive beans for not massive savings.
100 billion a year on the NHS. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of pleased that this whole maxim is starting to die. The London maxing, Europe maxing, retard maxing, that seems to be dying a death, which I'm silently pleased about. Anthropic leaked some source code for Claude Code. I don't know what the latest is on that, but not massively European. But I thought that was quite an interesting thing that caught my eye this week. And then the bigger item I wanted to start with was Mistral raising $830 million to build NVIDIA-powered AI data centers in Europe. This feels like a big deal. Every day I open the press, it looks like Mistral has got a new business model. They are always doing new things, but it seems to be quite successful. They seem to be doing well, which I think is great. They're now not competing with OpenAI. They're more competing with AWS. They're going up against the hyperscalers on European soil, building out our own AI infrastructure against the kind of contextual backdrop of $765 billion worth globally being earmarked for build out. So the questions to the room are, does sovereign AI infrastructure work? Should we be thinking like this? Is it a protected market? Is it just expensive nationalism? Going back to Matt Miller's response from Sequoia, ex-Sequoia. Will founders just use whatever is available compute-wise? Is Mistral becoming a utility, which I don't think is a bad strategy, or anything else on your minds to do with this Mistral big fundraise? It's debt, by the way. It's not equity. This is debt, which I think
the compute base, if you have your own data centers, is lower, right? I mean, so in terms of staying in the game, I mean, it's survival cash, right? Compared to what their competitors are raising. They need to raise all the money they can. So I suspect
by European
there's a cost
standards
reduction.
is big. By global, not. You're right.
Yeah, so there's a cost reduction, I suspect, and compute control, not relying on third parties. All positive as far as Mistral is concerned, but will it be enough? We'll see. Depends how many crazy laws Germany puts in place, right? About sort of having to use.
They're loosening. I was reading all the all the stuff. What was it called? The Mertz's China.
Didn't they just mandate open document format? I think.
I don't know. Lomax, do you never open document formats?
No.
I think so. There was something.
It's just mandates there for document format.
But it feels like they are talking a good game. They are opening. They're thinking more broadly. They're thinking smart. I think. Who knows what will kind of come down to our level and what's being where rubble hit road. But it feels like they're doing stuff. Lomax, what else would you pick up on the?
I would just say, look, I think Mistral is doing the right thing here generally, like integrating vertically on this critical piece, and probably de-risking it as well from a supply chain perspective, and just having a little bit more control over its own ecosystem and future. I mean, I would just say more generally, without trying to be a downer, because I do think it's great that Mistral is having a go, because there's no one else is doing this in the UK, which is like they're doing great, but everything about Mistral is just like a sort of 1% of what happens in the US. How much have they raised? They've raised $1 billion, and OpenAI has raised over 100 billion. Like, what's the valuation? Like 10 billion versus 800 billion.
Well, the valuation is normally what OpenAI raises, right? And
of course, well, not even. Yeah, exactly. And then, well, would probably know that OpenAI raises 3x the valuation. And then what's the revenue? Well, the revenue is potentially, it's minuscule, projected to be $1 billion by the end of the year. Well, OpenAI run rate potentially now is 30 billion. It's probably even more by the time we speak. So everything that happens with Mistral is just a little kind of small asterisk in the.
But we have to start somewhere, right?
But you have to start somewhere. This is a pretty big debt package in European terms. 830 million dollars. Yeah. And actually, it was announced now the data center is going to be operational in Q2 2026. We're in Q2 2026 now. So, they've actually managed to get on with it. At least, I mean, we'll see whether they can actually execute, because we'll probably see in the context of Poolside in a minute, this stuff is actually harder or easier said than done. And I think it's an interesting development, to be honest. I think it's testament probably to the ambition that Mistral has. And I think it's, for the equity early investors, it's great. It's debt financing. It's non-dilutive.
Is NVIDIA part of the debt financing structure? Do you know?
Well, they're part of the equity. No, I don't know if they're part of the debt. That would be a weird thing for them. It would be weird for NVIDIA to be. The debt will be, debt providers. No, I mean, I think it's probably just generally like their decision to use debt rather than equity reflects a sort of maturing of the AI industry where it is today. I mean, I know we've seen a lot of this.
It's a big bet though. It's a big bet to put this out, put it out on a limb like that in debt, not equity, or not even split. This is
but I mean, CoreWeave has raised 7.5 billion in debt. Lambda Labs 1.5 billion. So they're not, again, the numbers in the US are a lot bigger.
It's the usual suspects, right? Society Generale, like I don't know, it's probably the banks, probably.
Yeah, of course it will. They're probably got some subsidy for
support, Blackstone-esque providers. But I mean, it's pretty, I think actually it's a pretty safe bet. I mean, the trajectory of AI, unless Mistral completely screw up their customer base and growth, is only going one way. So we forget in our little bubble the way we use AI that most people aren't. So, I
think it's a safe bet. Although if you have to depreciate the chips more quickly, then it becomes less of a safe bet as the debt provider, I would have thought. But yes,
they are, if they're moving into utility space, they will be too big to fail. So the French government will become will become
And
owners.
that was it. Yeah.
Well,
I mean,
this is why I thought the comment earlier about, Matt's comment that sort of sovereign welfare was, I mean, it's BS really. When you look at what the US buys and the requirements they have and the constraints across government for how they purchase and who they purchase from, they're very much buy America. And they do a very good line in sort of counter argument when it's anybody else who puts up walls or puts up any free trade barriers. And it's always been this way. So the idea that the UK shouldn't have sectors, particularly defense, but beyond that, where mission critical and anything to do with infrastructure resilience and security should not buy things it has control over and from companies that has a British.
But it was funding as well.
It's anathema,
Andrew.
right?
He was giving us a bit of a punch for the funding side. I think being a customer, I think is truly defensible. But I think he was looking at the funding side. So you're just taking government money and it's all sovereign tech. But I think you're right in principle, as in the American system they hate socialism until they take socialism. And there isn't one large company in the States that hasn't benefited from some form of social welfare from the US government. So maybe it's just different packages in different ways. That's how I see it.
Well, the
I
defense
wanna
companies,
talk about-
including Palantir, must be 90% government revenue.
50%.
Right?
50%.
Higher than that.
About
Higher than
50%
that,
of
I
Palantir's contract value is US government.
think. Okay. But the defense companies will be a lot higher.
Yes, and also they are obviously Palantir are then working with multiple global governments. So it's there is a lot of government capital running through their books. That is for absolutely sure. But the US is just 50. I know that. Talking about governments, UK defense tech brain drain is next on the docket. So FT story this week. This feels a bit anecdotal and less data driven, which I was surprised by from the FT. But the angle here is that UK defense tech founders, not European, but UK defense tech founders, are relocating abroad, not just the States, amid funding and government procurement delays. So policy appetite is up there, but the actual procurement process can take somewhere between 3 and 5 years. So lots of questions around this. Is this real? Are we really losing talent abroad because of funding and the procurement cycles? What does it take? I mean, what can we do at our lower seed and early stage investment stages? What can we do to deal with this? And will the UK government catch up in time? So lots of very broad, open questions.
Lob a brick with a note through the window of the Ministry of Defence or the Ministry of Defence. I don't know. It's tricky. This is a buyer problem as much as it is a funding problem. At scale, it's a funding problem.
Andrew? Do you do that? Do you invest
we do defence. We do defence tech, yeah. Less gov tech. But
are you invested in any companies that the government is their only customer? Because obviously you've got all the primes and all the segue, right? I mean, I think there are some startups where they, some of the
space tech, defense tech companies, realistically, are really only government buyers or indirect government buyers. So the buyers are primes who are linked to government contracts. But it's a buyer problem, and this government has a strong line in procrastination. And we know the strategic defense review took ages. They're holding off on spending the money. It comes down to the money again. And later stage scaling is a private market capital problem, as we talk about over and over again on this podcast. But right now, today, the government needs to be issuing contracts for this stuff. Simple as that. And it's not as if the requirement isn't there. It's not as if this is welfare defense contracts. These are needs that the military has desperately.
Yeah. Lomax, where would you take this one?
Look, I think if you want to go very, very big picture on this, is the US spends $1 trillion a year, up nearly $1 trillion a year on defense, and
1.5 isn't
no. I mean,
this
Trump said he
budget?
wants to grow it to 1.5 trillion next year. I mean, there's still a bunch of approvals that need to happen for that. But they run effectively. The US is still largely, I would say, a martial economy. The Europeans are not, as we know. The UK and France, as two of the big economies in Europe, are basically tapped out on defense budget. And I'll go into a little bit more detail on that. The Germans, interestingly, have a lot more cash for defense now after they, at the beginning of last year, you might remember, removed this fiscal headroom and Merz has allocated 500 billion across industry and or infrastructure and defense, and a large part of that is going to be defense. So the German defense budget could actually be close to 150 billion in the next couple of years. It's going to be, I think, 115 billion euros this year across the different pots. For context, UK is more at like the 60, 70 billion. The problem with the UK is there's actually just no money for this. I think so. Germany has money. Question as to how they're going to spend it. I think that's the big question from chatting to defense founders and investors is there's a chance that
surely they're going to be bailing out their own auto industry, their own manufacturing industry. That's got to be step one for them.
Yeah, and sorry, also don't forget that these budgets, technology, which is the world that we live in, is only 10, 15, 20, max 25% of these budgets. Okay, so a lot of these budgets are going on recruits, barracks, like simple, like old economy
analog stuff.
Yeah. As Andrew alluded to, the Brits are paying a lot of lip service to this, but there's quite clearly no money for this. So the SDR, the Strategic Defense Review, took place in May last year. There was also the Defense Industrial Strategy, which was a follow-up to that, was published in September 25, paying lots of lip service to, the increase of the defense budget to 3% in the next parliament, and that they would release the DIP, the Defense Investment Plan, which is going to actually earmark and outline how the money is going to be spent and with whom, not with whom, but where and on what programs. That was supposed to be done last year. It's still not done and may not be done for a while. So clearly there's a massive disconnect between what the people have been saying and what they maybe want to happen. But when they go and try and cost everything and try and find the money, which should translate into what the Defense Investment Plan is going to say, that hasn't even been released yet. So I do think the UK, and this then ties into this article, which is that startups and scale-ups in the UK selling into UK defense are actually really struggling. It's a very bad place to be as a startup because the government is paying lip service to, we want to kind of open the floodgates and do business with you. But actually, they're just like playing for time because they're not really coming through. And they're even willing to sign things. I know companies that have signed big framework agreements with government, but actually under the framework, are projects actually getting signed and cashed up? No. This then drives founders who operate on 24-month funding cycles, who actually want to build a big business, to go to Germany, which is a tricky one. If you don't speak German, you don't have any German DNA in your company, or to go to the US, where the market is 10 times bigger. And the final thing I'll say is the Americans have a much better history, pedigree, system for integrating and buying new technology into defense. They have like these programs of record. They have, like the US has a history of doing this. I'll give you one example of a company in our portfolio which is doing suborbital rocket cargo delivery. So delivering high value cargo using rockets anywhere on Earth, which you could argue is a relatively sci-fi concept. But the US has budget for these things. And actually, you can win contracts for this. In Europe, or you get laughed out of the room in Europe if you came with this is potentially a very game-changing capability to deliver high-value cargo anywhere on Earth in 75
Europe
minutes.
hasn't got any high-value cargo to deliver.
Well,
Stop it, Andrew.
But I'll maybe end
jest.
my monologue now. But this is a very, very important. This article is bang on. I know you say this is anecdotal, but a lot of things that precede and seed are anecdotal because that's the sort of world that we live in. Because there's still no limited data and lack of information.
The last two defense tech companies I spoke to that were both UK, both actually in drones, they were relocating to the Bay, and one has just raised 6 mil seed and the other 10 mil seed, and they did it in 4 weeks. So
the final point I'll say is Anduril is, how old's Anduril? 7 years old, 8 years old?
Not even, is it?
Not even, probably not even.
I thought it was 5, 6.
Anduril, this just won a $20 billion contract with the US. I mean, it's a 10-year, 5+5 contract, but a $20 billion contract, like basically a startup. It's the same age as probably some of the European equivalents. A $20 billion, it's unbelievable.
I saw Palmer Luckey doing the demo of the headset that can look through walls. He just loves geeking out on all the latest tech. I think it looks quite fascinating.
On the procurement side, I mean, to be fair to the MOD, they have been making progress on that. You've got the Defence Office for Small Business Growth, which was set up, I think, actually the beginning of this year, which aims to be a sort of one-stop shop for startups to be able to access the defence landscape, which is obviously highly complex. They have set spending targets. I think it's $7.5 billion by 2028 to go specifically to SMEs. Provided it's honoured.
That's all right.
As Lomax said about the the DIP, you've had the amalgamation of the Defence Infrastructure Organisation and the too many acronyms. Defence Equipment and Support Organisation, I think, was combined into another acronym, which I think is the National Armament Directorate or something.
And they change every government, don't they? They change.
Which sounds wonderfully communist. But so they are trying to pull parts of the organisation together to be pointing in the right direction. And I know there are people working on the inside from the private sector on how to try and apply a better policy within procurement. They've set time caps. I think it's a maximum timeline of 5 years now for new equipment and 3 years for software.
That's crazy long.
Which still sounds long to me, exactly. And I think some of it's cultural. So there has been this 80% solution push where the idea is rather than wait for something that ticks all the boxes and 100% right, you actually take something that's nearly right and you put it in field and you start testing it and you iterate it. And that's a cultural shift that's come directly from learnings in Ukraine. So there is movement in the right direction, but without the money, as Lomax says, it sort of lands as a bit of a damp squib. And so the government has to reconcile what every government hasn't reconciled for the last really 20, if not 30 years, which is the rhetoric and the foreign policy goals versus the big equipment and the technology we do or don't have, be it radios, be it sensors, all the way up to destroyers and frigates, just not being able to cover the things we want to cover.
I want to shift gears. I want to talk about Poolside and CoreWeave. Now, I guess first glance at surface, it doesn't look like a super interesting story, but for context, Poolside have lost their deal with CoreWeave. So CoreWeave were supplying effectively AI infra, and Poolside is an AI model company also on the AI infrastructure side. Poolside is European founded, well capitalized, great team. CoreWeave are, I think they're US. I'm assuming they're US. Now they've lost that partnership. The deal has collapsed. The questions for the room, which might then allude to why I think this is potentially a bigger story, is how should we or European founders think about compute? Is there a risk? Can compute be taken for granted? Will it affect us at all? Does this lean into Mistral's infrastructure play? Is there a connective tissue there? Is this a one-off or a sign of structural stress? Are we going to see more infrastructure deals wobble? Because my assumption is there's a bunch of politics and relationship play here as to who's going to serve whom with what, because I can't believe that between energy and all of the construction friction that everybody is going to be able to have everything they want. So I don't know, maybe Lomax, you can set more of the scene better than I just did, and then we can go from there.
Well, I think as you alluded to, this overlaps with the Mistral story, and then there's maybe a kind of key lesson for Mistral here, which is I think very interesting. So, Poolside is a very cool company founded by Jason Warner, the former CTO of GitHub, and ISOCAN, who is a seasoned kind of dev tool founder in Europe, looking to build foundational models specifically for software development. They actually became headline, a decacorn valued at, I think, 12 billion at the end of last year. But that deal has just actually been unwound or never actually completed as a result of what you just walked us through, Dan. So the CoreWeave deal,
I didn't know when that
ended up knocking out the NVIDIA-led fundraising of 2 billion at the 12 bill valuation, which was supposed to be at the end of last year. So this has had pretty significant knock-on effects for Poolside as a going concern, maybe as is an exaggeration, but certainly like in terms of their journey, because that's a big fundraising round to fall out. I think, look, ISO is quoted as saying, ISO Kant, the co-founder, is saying, look, to compete at the frontier, you need to be vertically integrated from dirt to intelligence. So this is very similar to the Mistral branching out into their own data centers. So I do think, ISO probably had a point there, which is why they did this deal with CoreWeave in the first place.
But I think strategically, the problem for the business itself is that if they don't get the scale, then they can't prove that they have a product that's serious against sort of GitHub Copilot and everything else, right?
True.
So I mean, it's a matter of being able to prove that they can deliver on the promise, and without that, the compute scale, it's very hard to do.
It won't be long until we're also seeing these kinds of stories include energy provision. I mean, we've spoken about this before, but this will have to be a full stack solution.
Yeah. And who knows, like maybe energy provision was an issue here. Like it goes to the point, like executing this kind of project is very different to the core mission of the company. And whatever happened, it hasn't been executed. And so, Mistral is now branching out to do a similar thing. And the lesson clearly for Mistral as well, this is great, but make sure you've hired some pretty bloody good people who have specific domain and the right experience here to get this executed. There's a lot of execution risk in this.
So then the last thing I wanted to do was get into predictions. Now, I have one. I don't know if either of you do or have got anything on your minds, but here's my prediction, my learnings from this week. Not too dissimilar from last week, which were around how the hyperscalers are predicting and projecting revenue. It's a similar kind of thread to that, which is, so here's my prediction for you, see what you think. So the good enough local model becomes the default for nearly all knowledge work within 18 months. That's the encapsulating prediction. Now, not because this is better than the hyperscalers or the existing cloud frontier models, whatever it is, it's just because it's private, secure, instant, nearly free, and 95% as good. That's where I think we're going to end up in a very, very short shrift. I was out for lunch yesterday with a friend of mine who's a quantum physicist, uber geek, smart man, and he was sharing with me the setup that he's home built on all kinds of cobbled together Jepa this, Kimmy that, whatever, to build the system that he needs to run his models and his setup at home. And it was just mind-blowing how basic the infrastructure that he had at home was and what he was able to do with it. And I think this kind of leans into it. Another bringing to life kind of contextual bucket for you is that Google have just developed an inference algorithm called TurboQuant. I don't know if you guys have seen this. Now, this shrinks AI's working memory down to just 3 to 4 bits per value without needing to retrain the model. It cuts memory footprint from 6x and speeds and attention computation up by 8x with zero loss in accuracy. So to put that into context, it's eliminating video memory bottleneck, which means that models can process continuous video feeds directly on edge. And if you think about self-driving cars, just as a physical example of this, you can now do such smart stuff on edge. Now, there are loads of breakthroughs like this with regards to compression or tokenized speed or access. And if you've got a 70 billion parameter model running on your Mac, handling 90% of all your knowledge work use cases, I think this is going to erode a whole bunch of the common narrative in our world. So
I, as you know, am not enamored with the quality of the hyperscale models, let alone using a subpar.
You've always been a bit
anti-LLM.
You've always been a little bit like, it's just an auto compute.
It's not so much that. It's just that they're still so often bad. They're just not reliable. And so the idea that I would then, use a local model that's even worse, I mean, forget it. It's also terrifying because they make enough mistakes already as it is. They're not to be trusted, in short.
No, fair.
So I certainly would not. So I think that is a problem we are already wrestling with that I don't think we've seen manifest yet, but I think we will. I think there are going to be some people are going to find that what they thought was scripture and gospel rather is not. and people would have made mistakes. And, I've nearly made some terrible mistakes and started to double check everything. So yes, they're here to stay, not in the form they are. And I don't think second-rate models will survive because I don't think it's tenable.
I think we should start. Do you know what we'll just start doing? We'll start doing predictions with money on the table. I think we'll even if it's £10,
Yes,
whatever it is. I think
let's
we'll
make it more exciting.
Last on our docket are deals of the week. So we've already spoken about with StarCloud raising $170 million Series A to build out data centers in space. I still don't buy it. The third week I've said that, but I think it's just such a cool thing. That was my deal of the week. Lomax, you got one?
No, but I just want to reiterate that StarCloud is the quickest to unicorn of any company that's gone through Y Combinator. It was founded by an English dude. Yeah. So we talk about UK, we talk about Europe in very melancholic terms sometimes, or very disparaging terms. This is great. No, the downside, of course,
that's why I was in. That's why I was in. Is like
built-
even if I don't believe in data centers in space, we still have to celebrate the technology, the founder.
Bro,
the
this
thing.
is amazing.
That's my
The guys
take.
raised $170 million from probably the best venture firm in the world, or certainly like top 3 or top 5, benchmark, in record time out of Y Combinator. If you follow him on socials, he's great narrator.
Yeah.
And I'm just generally, very impressed by everything that he's done. And kudos and hats off to Finn Murphy at Nebula, friend of the pod, who led the pre-seed, and good friend Deck Kelly, fellow Dragon Chaser, who with his fund, a proud LP here, who invested in that company. So I think that's great. And also, by the way, they did raise a little bit of money in the middle, I think, but there's basically been no dilution from seed to $1 billion unicorn status. So an early stage investor, that's a pretty powerful thing. My deal of the week is Fractile. Well, Fractile hasn't actually done a deal yet, but they're in advanced talks to raise 200 million. This is a London-based AI chip maker, which is pretty rare. It's pretty cool.
Wow.
It's an Oxford spin-out. Yeah, the company is in discussions with apparently Accel. I guess this was a leak. Founded in 2022 by Dr. Walter Goodwin, then a PhD student at Oxford University's Robotics Institute. So it's an Oxford spin-out. People are often very rude of spin-outs because they can often be slow and take time. But this is cool. Companies developing chips that use in-memory compute, and they have raised from Kindred, from good friends of the pod as well, NIF, Native Innovation Fund, and OSC. And this is a big step up, and both valuation and firepower. It's definitely good for them.
Boom! Bring it on! Bring on the Brits. Anything we shouldn't have?
I got a deal.
Go, Andrew.
The 50 million Series B, led by ARC, for Mana Air Delivery out of Dublin.
I've not seen it.
Yeah, I mean, they've done about 250,000 successful deliveries, apparently. And based out of Dublin, they've got 100 staff in the US. They've raised about $110 million to date, and now rolling out deliveries. And how hard doing hardware is. So good for them.
Gents, thank you so much for your time. We will catch you all next week.